I think a fascinating day, for sure. Huh? But if I think about something like the European health data space, do they have an Instagram page or a TikTok page? My point is, how are we going to make sure that the next generation is super excited, like we are excited, as a kind of bunch of nerds dealing with data and with health? And my point is that we have to make sure that what we do here, at some point in time, translates to the big community. So what I'd like to do in the panel is really discuss how the message which comes out of this meeting conveys and inspires the next generation. So I would like to see a European health data space TikTok page tomorrow, so that we can start to show what's in for everybody, not just for us.
What's the feeling about that? A TikTok page.
You see my point, eh? There is something special. In the weekend, there was a festival in Belgium called Nerdland.
Yes.
And nerds are kind of cool now. And sometimes I feel that we are a bunch of nerds. I mean, excited about health and omics and all these things, but at the end, what's the product? What we're going to make? And I really got goosebumps from what you and your wife have been doing. Maybe just 1,000 Romains is enough to change the world, but that's super concrete. Eh? So what is it that we're going to build so that we excite and build a future that I'm obsessed about? What I'm obsessed about is one thing. There has been a Chinese model more than 2,000 years ago where the doctor got paid as long as people in the village remained healthy. And once you got sick, you no longer had to pay. And the reason why the doctor could do that, he was living amongst the people in the village. And he had so much data from basically the village that he could see things in advance and could predict. Would that not be something super aspirational? That Europe says, if you live in Europe, we're going to try to provide every European something which keeps him or her in a predictive fashion healthy. And maybe healthy like, have you seen the movie Big Hero 6? It's about 5 friends which get to know a big inflatable doctor, Baymax. And Baymax lives in a very tiny box at my home, and sometimes appears, tells me something, uses data points, and keeps me healthy in a super sexy, experiencing fashion. And that's what I would like to discuss today.
Go ahead, man, go ahead.
Okay. So we're going to try to make this interactive as well. So I'm going to get my panel on stage, ask maybe one question, but really would like to have your input, right? And really try to think about what is it that you're going to tell tonight to your kids? What did you do today? And I don't want to hear, I was 6 hours in a meeting. That's boring. But I built the future of Europe. That's something I would like to hear, right? That kind of thinking. So what I'm going to try to do, ask, first of all, Aneta Tyszkiewicz, which already was asking a pretty difficult question to the panel. So we're going to expect them to do that for us. Aneta is running as a director, the digital and data team in the European Federation of Pharma Companies. So I'll let you introduce you in a second. Second, Nathalie Lambrechts. Nathalie is part of Vito. I have the big honor to work with Nathalie. Nathalie is working on something super fascinating, the launch of the first citizen-centric health data platform ever on the planet, where we believe that Belgium will be the first to do that. We'll come back to that in a second. And Christine Durinx. Christine is the head of one of the coolest biotech institutes on the planet. And Christine joined coming from a data bioinformatics background, looking to the biotech world with a data head, which I think is the best position to be in. Then Romain, I mean, you don't need an introduction again, but you really gave us goosebumps. And I have to admit, I don't know Heidi Howard. Heidi, sometimes people ask me the 2 key jobs you have to kind of consider for the future. And I always mention not AI prompters. I mention plumbers and ethicists. And I think representing what we really need in the future of dealing with data is ethics, morality, and that's why we welcome you. Thank you. Yeah. So give it an applause. Yeah. I'm going to ask a few questions, if you're fine-tuned people, but try to build on that and try to think big. Don't try to see restrictions. Try to see opportunities. based on what you've heard. And therefore, Romain, I'm going to start with you. So the topic is patient and citizen trust. And I think we all agree at some point in time, we are all on a trajectory from being a healthy citizen to becoming a patient. Incidentally, in 2025, every little child born in Hong Kong and born in Dubai will get a genetics passport. That's not Europe, that's Hong Kong and Dubai. So do they have a benefit? And so my first question to you, Romain, does the perception of trust and dealing with data changes when I become a patient? And would that not help to explain that maybe we are all hidden patients which we can help in a cool new way?
Yes, thank you for this question. Yes, indeed, for sure. That as soon as you understand that you are a patient yourself or somebody that you love, it changes totally your perception of the data. As soon as you understand that you have skin in the game, you understand that it makes a lot of sense to share the data. In our example with the genomics, you understand that if you share the data, you can help to understand the genomes. It's something really, really powerful. But on the other hand, I think we should not see the general population as a highly, just a kind of homo economicus, highly egoist and selfish, and that we can find also a lot of people who are willing to share the data. Few years ago, I was invited to join a study from the King Benoit Foundation called My DNA, Everybody's Business. And I was really struck to see the result of because I was involved and discussing with the panel of citizens and people who have nothing to do with rare disease, who they suppose had nothing to do with disease, and step by step they understood, oh, but I have something. And they understood that if they could share the data for common good, it will change things. And the majority of the participants, the majority of the citizens at the end answered that they were willing to share.
Absolutely.
Even their genomic data. So I think somebody this morning said that the difference between the patient and the citizen is actually the same people at a different stage in his life. And I think it was really smart.
That's interesting.
To say that this way.
Incidentally, last week there was a rare disease barometer presented. And so 70% of parents of people with a rare disease would have loved to be diagnosed at birth. 82% of parents with a rare disease child would have loved that. These are tremendous numbers. But that brings me to Heidi. If it turns out that we can find out who's predisposed to something, for instance, I'm predisposed to get blind. I tell that to everybody. My genome is open. Do we run the risk that people say, well, you still have the right to be sick? So is that something, Heidi, which we will start to have to consider? So yes, we can provide opportunities to deal with data, but what if people say, well, so be it?
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the trust.
Sure, please do.
So indeed, we do, like in empirical studies, we see a difference between patients and their families and advocates compared to those who are not in that group. But they do overlap. You don't have to be a patient or an advocate or a family member to want to donate your data. I think a lot of it has to do with awareness. But in the ethical sphere, we also have to let people disagree, and we don't have to convince them all the time. And to be fair, this is not the first time that we've dealt with this, right? There's debates about, for example, lung cancer and smoking, and if you bring on a health condition through some acts of your own, how should we be dealing with that? So this is definitely not the first time that we're dealing with this. But if we go back to the data about trust, I'm not 100% sure it's got to do with trust when it comes to patients and their families. With regard to donating, I think it might be the value judgments in the risk-benefit calculation. So basically, the benefits are such, for patients and their families, are just considered much greater than the risks. And those who are not faced with those conditions are not seeing that benefit because it's not in their world, it's not in their
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
So that's one way we could think about it. Just to be clear, because I think that for trust, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, you have to understand what's happening. You can have blind trust, of course, but if you are not aware of something, and if you don't understand it, it's hard to trust,
Yeah.
right? So without that, it's going to be hard to get
Interesting. Yeah. There is
general
this-
publics on board.
Yeah, excellent. There was this amazing picture you might recall from the European Football Championship in France a few years ago, where a Danish soccer player got sudden cardiac arrest and he fell down, and all his team players were standing around him, remember? That image has been seen by 300 million people. And if I show that when I give a keynote on the future of genomics, at least 3-4 people out of the lay public come and ask, where can I get myself sequenced? And can I get my kids sequenced to find out that this is not happening? And that's sometimes where I think we have an opportunity to show people what genomics can do. Because that image, soccer, people didn't relate to genomics, but we can use that to sell our business, right? So that brings me to Nathalie. If I have a place where I got myself sequenced, can I store that in a safe way? And is there already indications that very soon we can start to use this data for the better? That I can be helped by sharing this data? Is there something out there which you can comment on?
It's on?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thank you. What we are building in Flanders is indeed a safe place, a vault, a virtual vault, where you can put health data about yourself. And the aim of our project is to build this infrastructure through technology and with functionalities around this, indeed to help citizens share their data for R&D. And at the moment, we are focusing more on the data that you referred to in the beginning of the session, the data in the village that the GP knew about, and that very often now in the treatment is lost, or is something very often somewhere out there in digital applications, or in, think about in the your retailer has some data about your purchase, which food you purchase, your perception about how you want to be treated, your life goals. All these data, these are the first steps that we are collecting now in a technology, and we are bringing these data ready for research. So for this, we are building technical components like consent management. We already heard before, like dynamic consent, that's something that's in there. Also consent profiles, because we learned that some people want really tight control, and that's when we come to the trust issue, whereas some others say, yeah, I really trust our research institutes, and for me it's okay to share it with research in general. We are making a browser on top of it, so that people can also see what's in there about me, and what can I learn about my own health, and how can I improve my own health. But I think the most important aspect and the most challenging one is the governance of this entire aspect. We heard about all these European laws and how to deal with it, and the European health data space also wants to empower citizens. And that's also what we want to do with this governance. We want to make it a participatory governance, so that citizens can also, like you did, Romain, also inspire the research bottom up, that they can come up with ideas like these data can be useful for this or that. They can always say for themselves, I want to share my data with this, but we want to do this in a participatory way, where the experts are advised or work together with the citizen in co-creation.
So you hope that data altruism sells?
Yes, indeed. That's an aspect in it, and we know that for these kind of data to be out there, you indeed, there is the engagement of the citizen. He needs to put them in there.
Absolutely.
And for this engagement, you need trust. And for trust, you need to give him some kind of control. Or self-determination.
And is it control or also reward? Should you, I'll get back to that, Aneta, with you. Should I get rewards for sharing my data? Monetary or maybe other data? Maybe something to park. Because I first would like to use what you're going to store in the pot to Christine. You run a big research institute, and I guess one of the powers you have is looking to big data sets to discover novel genetic insights, novel molecular mechanisms of actions. Is that evolution towards every citizen something private, is that good or is that not good?
Yeah, so not so long ago, we spoke to one of the politicians here, so we regularly speak to politicians, and so we explained that we need access to big data sets, well-characterized data sets, and he said, yeah, don't worry, in a few months every citizen will have their vault, and then your problem will be solved, because every doctor will be able to put the data in there, and then the citizen will be able to share. I think we've heard earlier today that first of all, there is data quality. A GP or a specialist practitioner doesn't have the time to curate data, to encode it. They note it down for their own use, but they don't note it down in a way that is useful for another physician. So I think that's one element. And on the other hand, you rely on citizens opening the data. And to work with data, you need a lot of data, and it should be unbiased. And if we rely on individuals where privacy is the default, so the image of a vault is, I don't put the things that I want to share in a vault, I put everything that I don't want to share. I'm not sure that associating your personal data with a vault is something that will encourage people to be open about it. And it's certainly not going to solve the need for data for molecular researchers.
Yeah, and if it would be, yes, I follow that logic, it's a vault which saves my data, but all of a sudden a pharma company comes knocking my vault and says, Koen, you have a predisposition for disease X, or Romain, your child has a predisposition to disease Y. We might have a solution to recruit you in a trial. Is that something you might start to see happening, Aneta?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Very much agree with everything what has been said. I trust that indeed patients, when you are a patient, you might have a greater sort of motivation to share your data because it can be translated more immediately into your better experience of care. But if we are actually talking about creating a life science ecosystem that addresses the areas where the current therapeutic options are non-existent or not satisfactory, it's no longer ethically acceptable that we do not use the data that is generated outside of the strictly controlled environment, and that applies to all of the partners operating in the healthcare system. We now have increased analytical capability. We have the ability of the novel technologies that allows us to generate insights out of this data. And this is also very important. Access to data is one thing, but we also need to remember that we need to apply appropriate methodologies to ensure that this data, that the evidence generated out of this data meet the highest scientific standards. We are not talking here about downgrading the scientific standards, just to be very clear also about that. Now, when it comes to actually access to data, sharing the data, and how that might enhance the processes for discovering, developing, and delivering medicines to patients, where firstly, what we have not succeeding, I mean, certainly in my opinion, is to communicate to society about existing safeguarding mechanism. Europe possesses a very comprehensive framework governing access, use, and of the data. And when it comes to the research-based industry, we have a long history of working with data. Behind the data, there are patients. So in order to generate and maintain trust with the patient, we need to apply a number of principles. We need to comply with GDPR, with the clinical trial regulation, with the good clinical practice guidance. And on the top now, we would need to see whether the AGS truly delivers on its promise. Hence, we need to be aware that they are already mechanisms, like the data is aggregated, there are defined access controls, etc. By having access to a broad range of data, we would be able to identify trends, would be able to have enhanced sort of understanding of disease progression, treatment patterns, and its impact on the society. Specifically in the area of rare diseases, where 95% of 7,000 identified diseases, although today I've seen the number of 8,000, do not have approved therapy. If we continue doing the things the same way we do today, I mean, we won't be able to have the approved medicines in the next 100 years. Hence, but that has to happen collaboratively without excluding certain partners, because that's why I also asked the question about the opt-out before. Yep. Because what would happen if we have actually scarce evidence comparing to the other partners in the sector?
Yeah. Incidentally, I just met John Holemka, who runs the Mayo Clinic, and they put 10 million patients on one single database. You know how many people opted out to use their data into RNA? 1%. It's less than 3,000, which is a good thing. People are inspired to. But you mentioned something super fascinating. You said it becomes ethically unacceptable not to use these data. And you might be aware that a few years ago, the state of Hawaii sued 2 of the biggest pharma companies because they brought a blood thinner to the market in Hawaii, just like they did in the rest of the world. But people in Hawaii have 3 digits in their genome, which makes that the blood thinner gets metabolized faster. And the 2 big companies had to adapt the regimen in Hawaii. And still, why are we not here yet? Because if I go, or I see a patient in the ICU, and I give a blood thinner without knowing his genome, there is 6% chance that he doesn't leave the genome at the ICU alive. So is that a tech issue? Is that a pharma doesn't see it issue? Is that an ethical issue? Where does that come from? And how can we bring that at least into practice? Because that's something people see and experience, that you can adapt based on my genome, something which works better. First you.
Well, I would say that this is an issue that needs sort of consideration at different levels, right? I mean, so firstly, whether indeed there was the right infrastructure, you know, in order to generate the data of sufficient quality. Secondly, whether we actually applied methodologies that allow us to generate evidence that were validated against clinical standards. And then thirdly, whether this evidence would be accepted by the regulatory authorities to inform, to enhance their decisions, and also then to inform HTA and reimbursement bodies' decisions. So we need to have, in order to increase the use of this type of data in research, we need to have a predictability at the early stage.
So it's thinking product, eh?
Yes.
It's thinking product. Heidi, is there something from your perspective which might help to get that out of the way? It's ethically unacceptable not to use it. I like that. Yeah,
it is a good soundbite. Yeah, and I think there is some logic behind it for sure. And at the same time, we are going, you know, again for ethical reasons, we also want to support people's autonomy if they don't want to donate or if they don't want to have their data used. But in this situation, though, it was a clinical situation, right? So the problem was not about I'm assuming, not about the patient's data, but about the infrastructure. And I mean, it could also have been that there was no electronic health data records, et cetera, et cetera. So in this clinical situation, I don't think the ethics were a big part of it. Yeah,
okay. And then a question which I'm going to start with you and bring to Christine. So we are very kind of strict with regard to privacy, with ethics, with dealing with data. But sometimes I have the feeling that the pendulum went to the complete other side. Now, there's a famous investor in the States, Don DeLillo, and he came with a concept of radical transparency. And radical transparency is a world in which every data point is open, which is maybe over the top. But imagine we start from a white page again, and everything is open. And we're going to build barriers, not starting from what we have now and put kotterijen. Is there a better future we can build if we rethink and let the pendulum start from the other side?
Yeah, that's a great way of making us think in in blue sky thinking. So thanks for that. Now, for me, when you say that, I can't see it because the laws pop up, right? So it wouldn't make sense in the doctor-patient relationship because that's a confidential relationship. So when you say that, to me, I'm thinking, okay, but everything that's built around that data point, the doctor, the patient, all the laws there, all the laws around research, all of that would have to change. So it doesn't mean that we couldn't do it, but at the moment, I just don't see it. Maybe somebody else has the vision. Yeah.
Christine, if you, or Anne?
So I have the impression, so policymakers make policies based on the values we share in a society. And I think privacy is a value that we share very much. There are other societies where the community is more important. Like, on the other hand, we also have values like health, like equality, like the freedom to expression. And we forget about this. We regulate, focusing on the privacy. It's the same with the AI Act. Where is the thinking about innovation, about health, about making things possible instead of making things impossible?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think big data needs, if we want to make a Europe that is working for everyone, we need everyone's data. Maybe not everyone, everybody has the right to opt out, but as much data as possible.
Yeah.
And from minorities in the first place, because if you type in your Google search bar human body, my body is not there.
Sure.
It's male white.
Yeah.
So we need the data.
Yeah.
And I think we can. I think the pendulum has switched too much to over-regulating and
I'm going to listen to the audience as well.
Over-protecting.
Yeah. So imagine you had a spell and you could fill the European health data space, because European health data space sounds fantastic, but I think also listening to your talk and the one from a few weeks ago, at this point it's an empty box, right? So what is it that you would like to see in that health data space? What goes in first? Christine, you first. What would you like to put in there? From a
high-quality hospital data.
Hospital data?
Very well annotated. Give the hospitals data curators, data managers, help them to put...
So hospital data first. Nathalie, what would you put in first?
Yeah, maybe come back to the previous issue on the privacy and the pendulum. I do think that if you want all the data out there, and especially from minorities, if you want to have them engaged in longitudinal studies, which is also very important in prevention, you need their engagement and their trust.
Yeah.
And I do think we need to think about ways how we can combine these two. How can we, with innovation, work privacy preserving?
Yeah.
And at the same time, unlock these data for innovation with the necessary consents out there.
Yeah.
So that's for me, as the EHDS states, we work on citizen empowerment. Let's not make it passive empowerment, let's make it active.
Active empowerment, yeah. So shout out from the public. What would you think adding to the space would make your life better? Ideas? Oh, please do. Deepak?
But no microphone.
Oh, I see.
Here you go.
Oh, I think the tech people are pretty switched on. They put the microphone on as soon as they think it might be used. I'd like to make two comments, if I could. The first one is in relation to your radical transparency remark. One of the challenges we face when thinking in a really radical way is that we're riddled with biases. This room is filled with people who want to make better use of data and enable data use. So we are naturally not in a good position to really weigh up the pros and cons of that topic. But the moment we transpose it into a different location, we then become unbiased. So I want you to imagine on the 1st of June this year, which is Saturday, everybody's financial data will be open unless you choose to put a block on anything. Your banking details, your savings, your tax returns, even Trump's tax returns, the hard-to-get ones, will all be made open suddenly. And the room then needs to rethink, how do I feel about that? What would be the process for limiting that? And I'm not saying we have time for that today, but I think that's a healthy way to reconsider that topic.
It helps to reconsider, eh?
It's just, it allows us to move outside our comfort zone and to feel uncomfortable. And I do feel uncomfortable immediately when I think about all my financial data being exposed to this panel, for example, or to you. Second point, you've asked what should we put into the EHDS first. I don't like that question What I would love to have instead is what do we most want to learn to get out of it?
Yeah.
Because we should put in first the stuff that helps us to get out what we most need.
That's exactly where I'm
That
heading
could
for.
be your question.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm heading. Because I think we all agree that in a perfect healthcare world, we no longer get sick, and that disease shouldn't appear. And even pharma companies start to follow that logic. But prevention, in all honesty, is hard. Prevention is not doing this, you have to do that. So could we start to think about asking people what they really dream of, what really their life goals are, and providing them all the tools, all the science, all the tech to reach their goals. And so instead of saying, well, Koen, you have to live healthier, you ask me what you dream, climbing the Kilimanjaro with my grandchildren. I don't even have grandchildren. So in order to reach that, you better keep me healthy. I'm absolutely happy to share data with you, for you helping me, and to opening up my vault for people saying, well, there's something I can help you with. And that might be, I hope, potentially, an aspirational way to tell to the next generation that we can offer you something in return for something which we can safely store, whether it's in a pot, whether it's in a federated learning type of approach, or whether it's in something called the eHealth data space, right? Other people, other comments. The gentleman in front? Yeah, you too, yeah, please.
Well, thank you. I think it's an interesting debate. It's an interesting day as well. I'm just missing one element which we all seem to leave as the elephant in the room. Mm-hmm. Technologically, it's interesting. Scientifically, it's interesting. Mm-hmm. But who's going to make money out of this? Mm-hmm. And what's the rules to make money out of this? And I think this is one of the key elements, I think, for people to have trust to put data in, but also for all the people that are interacting with this, to have some kind of rule set. How do we access this data? What can we do with it? Who will get the benefit? Is it going to be only the big pharma that has money enough to play with it? Is it only going to be scientists? Insurance? Who will have access to it?
Aneta, please. As the big pharma was called out, maybe I can give a try, if you don't mind. Yes. Thank you. That's a really, really good question. So firstly, the data will be used for the well-defined purposes as Deepak outlined, and also already it's being accessed and used for the well-defined purposes within the very strict ethical and legal frameworks. But access to data is one thing, but it doesn't give you any actually insights. You need to apply expertise, knowledge. You need to invest a lot. And to develop one simple drug, it takes on average 15 years. So you actually, what is here protected, what you call profit, is the invention. So if there is no protection of this invention, there is no further investments, there is no research in Europe. So that would be my simple answer.
So, Romain?
Yeah, but I see that point. But the thing is, this is on the protection of what comes out of it. But to get access to the database, because everybody needs to make their data available, but for free or not for free? Because right now, if you want to have access to data, you're paying hospitals. Patients are not seeing anything of that. I guess, you know, from your position, pharma also has a point on this. You will make your data available, but freely for everybody?
Yes, we will also make our data available.
But freely for everybody?
Yes, within the HDS, we are obliged to make our data available to everyone, but we are also already sharing the data within the well-defined routes, and actually we are measuring what value it has in terms of advancing our joint medical knowledge and to avoid duplication. These measures are not actually applied when it comes to the mechanism done from the other sides of the sectors, let's say. So the private sector is the one measuring the actual impact it does. Hence, yes, we are obliged to share our data, and we will be, within the European health data space, would be also obliged to share the data with a broad share of users. Nonetheless, I think talking about the monetization of data, firstly, I don't think in Europe this is sort of rooted in our culture. We are here more exploring the concept of data altruism, which has been brought up earlier today. And again, we need to look at the cumulative effect of all of the emerging and existing legislation. We have a Data Act that exactly is about to make sure that we can use the data for altruistic purposes. Hence, I don't think that this is an environment we can talk about the data monetization. We're more in Europe following the altruism principle.
Okay. Romain, you want to comment as well? And then we go to you.
Yeah, just add a comment about, and really good intervention once again, about the radical transparency. And in law, it happens often that you have a branch of law that are really the antithesis of another field. For example, you have intellectual property that creates a legal monopoly, and in front of it, you have competition law that really fight against competition. So it's not new. And in law, in the branch of law, we have to find balance. And there's this question of proportionality. And there's really an important case from the Conseil d'État français in the context of the Health Data Hub, when they came with this position about the GDPR, saying, okay, it's really important. It's a value to protect the data, but it also did come with other value. And you have to do this proportionality assessment. And it's a bit what is missing. And in your example, make it everything free, that you turn it in a kind of absurd way, it shows at which point law has to be proportionate. Oh, yeah. And it is what will be perhaps missed a bit at the time and that we need to refine. Yeah. About the monetization of the value, I think it's a bit the curse of our situation. Because a few years ago, people begin to say data is the new gold, something like that. And so because of that, people decide that, oh, because it's a new gold, let's put it in vault. And we'll say, oh yeah, it's in vault, but we need to share it, or we will do that. And I think it's because of this question of the monetization that a lot of questions that you have today are rising today. Yeah. That's the point.
The gentleman over there.
I'd want to go back to what Deepak said, that, and also the previous person, this is a very strange community here who's very interested in doing research and seeing the benefits, but it's not the same as the average person on the street, and particularly disadvantaged communities that have been oppressed by health systems in the past and see the risks and in fact have examples of data being misused to target them. And so I think you have to respect that and realize that some of those fears are real, some of them are imagined, some of them can be exploited by, fake news, etc. But the reality in the UK was we tried this a few times and we had millions of direct opt-outs, and the millions only stopped opting out anymore when the government cancelled the projects.
I see.
So this is the reality of if you do not bring people with you, that, with an opt-out mechanism, you'll end up with just the volunteers. And of course, that's what research cohorts are. They're the volunteers who see the benefits and are prepared to take the risks. But they're normally people who are in a position not to fear exploitation, etc. So for the European health data space, if you want to have the entire population and not enforce it, but bring people with you, you have to be very, very strict and really operate a system which can be showed transparently to be trustable. And that means not distributing the data. That's the model that we've been adopting and has now become national policy in the UK.
Okay, thank you.
Only non-distribution with controls, because if you don't distribute it, you can still have industry come and work in there, but you can always turn it off if you don't like what they're doing. You can always, control the keys as the custodians. Okay. So there is a mechanism. It's much harder to implement, but it is possible.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, because time starts to run out. We got much shorter time than we normally planned for, but the gentleman at the back.
I'm here again with my frustration. I'm very happy actually that Christine Durinx, you said something very important. You need structured data from the hospital. Please ask hospitals to do that, because we do not have the money for this. We do not have the right IT tools to do that right now. And it's very hard to do that in the electronic health records. You need to foresee that, and you have to give medical doctors tools to fill out that data, and it's high quality data that will lead to high quality results. But rubbish in is rubbish out, and I think it's very important to invest as Europe in that part as well.
Christine?
Yeah, Absolutely, and this relates also a bit to the question about should we pay citizens to get their data. So the idea is we give some little money to citizens to give their data, but this infrastructure is going to cost a lot of money. So it will be the taxpayer paying the infrastructure, so it's not the right question. We need to empower the hospitals, give them data curators, give them the infrastructure, build the infrastructure, and make it long-term sustainable. Yep. And we will need industry there, we will need the different governments there. Yep. But this is not free, and I think thinking about the long-term sustainability of the European health data space is essential.
Yeah. In Singapore, there is something interesting. Everybody who lives a healthy lifestyle a day, measured with an Apple Watch, gets $2 Singaporean a day, which is a real euro. So that's collecting real-world lifestyle data. And in Dubai, I get 1 gram of gold for every 2 kilograms I lose doing exercise, because I'm way more expensive if I become a diabetic patient than if you keep me pre-diabetic. So that's 2 governments which start to pay the citizen to deal with data. And therefore, I think a number of these models might be applicable into a European setting as well. I think in the order of time, I'm going to ask each of you, based on what you've learned and heard today, something which you would like us to take home from your perspective, which you think is absolutely helpful, important to help together create that new data-driven future based on trust. Heidi, may I start with you?
I have like 17, but I'll give you 2. One is, yes, we need to respect the autonomy of those who don't want to contribute, and we can, if you want them to contribute, then I think you have to engage them, bring them along with you, and have real conversations with them, not just surveys, and not just little focus groups, but really say, you're part of this, how do you want it, how are we going to do it?
Thank you, fantastic.
I think one of the key points that make the success of the 100 key genome initiative in the UK is the education part. Is the fact that they invest a lot in website, in tools, even in card games to help people to understand the genomes. And they gain the adhesion from, I will call, the early adopters, the people with rare disease, and then from there that they go to the innovation. So I believe that we need perhaps to...
So education and awareness. Yeah, thank you.
I would like to think about data like as a common good, something like the authorities think that half of my salary is a common good. They use it for infrastructure, for schools, for houses. And I'm holding them accountable because they have to produce reports, present what they're doing with it. It's the same with my data. I want them to use my data for the greater good of the community, for patients, for health. And then they're accountable for what they're doing with it. Yeah,
fantastic. Super clear. Thank you.
I want to specify that for the system that we are building, citizens are not being paid. And that's then exactly also the point I want to make. We know that they contribute, that they want to participate in this system because they wanted added value for themselves. And that is through better healthcare, more personalized healthcare, through reuse of their data, where they want to reuse it in their daily life. In digital applications, for instance. So what we want to do is give them tools to do that. And also they want to participate because they really have this feeling of public benefit. They have this data altruism. They want to contribute, but they want to know for what. They want to see this. So that's also an advice to you researchers. Tell your participants this. Tell them what they are participating in. And this will enhance their engagement because they really want to be there.
Yeah, and that's where that TikTok, Instagram idea came from. How cool would it be that every research, I've heard so many acronyms today, 50% I never heard of, but every of these acronyms is something exciting. Make it a TikTok story. Aneta.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think now we are really in a moment, in a groundbreaking moment, when the Europe is completely creating its new ecosystem for data and digital. So now, my sort of takeaway message for all of you would be to do not regulate, do not create another unrealistic restriction, but focus on implementation, by scaling up also existing initiatives that have developed well-functioning, well-tested solutions that have a shared confidence and trust across all of the different stakeholders. So we don't need more complexity, we need more standardization, harmonization, and replicability of what we are doing. So that would be my takeaway message.
Yeah, fantastic, super strong. So I think in the order of time, we have to close this. This went much faster than anticipated. Maybe I have one last question for yourself. You don't have to answer. But during the walking dinner, there will be 2 booths where you can provide a drop of blood and you get a full genome analysis. Can people who are willing to use that raise their hands so that we have an idea how many people we'll have in the waiting list? So it's 20%, 25%, it's more than normally. Normally people say, well, I don't want even to consider doing this because I need the educational insight, what will be done with that, what will happen if I find out. And that brings me back to your point, Romain. I think that one of our biggest tasks as researchers, as healthcare providers, is show the next generation how exciting the future could be and spend time in education, in awareness, and in showing aspirational ways to become part of our story altogether. And with that, I'm really going to ask you to upload this kind of public, and thank you, and see you next time.